Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Azure Functions team live webcast. I am Jeff Holland, and I am joined today by
Colby. Hi, Colby Tresness.
Yes, Colby looks great today. Colby, you were very excited for our webcast today. Is that an accurate statement?
I got a haircut specifically for the webcast.
That's how seriously we take this.
It's very important to me.
Okay, so we will get to it. If you've joined before, if this is your first time, we're the Azure Functions team or part of the team. And we are, having this monthly update. We're going to share some of the recent development, things that we've shipped across our tools and across the Azure Functions platform. We are going to talk about some of the stuff that's coming up next, some of the things that we're working on as a team right now. We've got a little bit of a demo from Colby, and we've got a bunch of questions that have come in already through Twitter. And as well, if you're watching this live on YouTube, there should be a chat window there. You can post questions, and we're going to spend the last 10 or so minutes just answering questions. There's been a lot of them. So with that, Colby, we'll jump right into it. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Maybe not, if this will cooperate. And we'll start the webcast with what is new. Okay, here we go.
Tunneling.
Great. Okay, so some of the stuff that is new this month that I wanted to share. The first, and this is a big one, this was also a common ask that we have been getting recently, and it's a valid issue, so we have written a full response. So if you have been interested in binding redirect, assembly resolution, we talked about this last month in the webcast, I believe, a little bit more about this. There's a new wiki post that we've posted. We've updated the GitHub issue, and if you're more interested in more, you can go to aka.ms/assembly resolution. And we'll take you right to this wiki post. It's going to break down what is binding redirects, how does it affect the version 1 runtime of Azure Functions, how does it affect the version 2 runtime of Azure Functions, and what is the work that we have in flight and will be started on very soon to improve it in the future as well. So this is a great spot to go to. So that's the first one I want to call out. The next one is, unsurprisingly so, based on this team, the Visual Studio Code team. There are more improvements even now to the Visual Studio Code experience.
The VS Code team is great.
They can't stop. They cannot be stopped.
They keep going.
So shout out to them. Most recently in the update that just went out this week, if you are using your application settings locally and you want to publish them to an Azure function in the cloud or pull them down from an Azure function into your dev environment, that's now just a right-click setting on your function app settings in the Azure Functions extension, as well as some cool stuff to automatically install the core tools if you don't already have them on your machine. We also did a release recently, a few weeks ago. We did a big version 2 runtime release. We hadn't done a release to the version 2 preview runtime in a while, so this was a big one. One of the things bundled in that release, though, was some performance improvements. So specifically, some of our language workers, like Colby's got some great data around cold start. Mm-hmm. If you are using Java or JavaScript in the version 2 preview runtime, we have released the first phase of improvements to cold start in those, and that was it was a significant bump.
We saw a nice increase in
or decrease, whichever one is better on that one.
I suppose increase in performance, decrease in latency.
There we go.
How about that?
So check that out. Worth looking at. And similar with version 2, if you're now installing extensions, so in the version 2 runtime, I think we've talked about this. If you want to use something like Event Hub or Cosmos DB or whatever in your function, you pull that as an extension. You can do that in the portal. You can do that in our tools. But now when you do it in the portal, it is much faster. It used to take, I think we had a thing which is this might take 5 or 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Now it takes a few seconds. So check that out. And if you're interested in the Java tooling, if you pull in dependencies with your Java application, before we used to make you package them up into a single jar, but now the Java tooling allows you to pull them in to a lib folder that will also work with the language worker. So that's the big stuff that is new.
Cool stuff.
It is good. What is coming? So this is the other good one. And then we've got a demo. Build. Woo. Are you going to this, Colby? Do you know?
Should I?
You should. Well, I hope everyone gets to go. I don't know how it goes. So the Microsoft Build Conference is coming up in a month from today, or not a month from today. Where am I? But in less than a month. So on May 7th in Seattle, there will be the Build Conference. There will be a ton of content about Microsoft All Up for any developer. So everyone watching here, this is your conference. There'll be a lot of cool releases around Azure Functions. Azure in general. Whether you're coming in person, feel free to let us know. We'll be around. We're going to have a booth. There'll be people from the team there all week. We would love to meet you.
Come hang out with us.
Serious, honestly. Let us know what you're doing, how we can help. We'll always have swag. If you want stickers, I don't know what other swag we'll have. I'm not even going to tell you how good it is because I want you to show up. And there's be sessions too. And if you can't come in person, the good thing is that for a lot of the big sessions, they broadcast them live. And for any session, they'll have recordings after the fact. So anything we share there will be available to you immediately or soon after. Another thing that we're working on. So I just talked about how we have extensions as a big part of version 2. This is fine for the most part in C# because these manifest themselves in NuGet packages. So for the example, if you want to use Cosmos DB in your C# Azure Function project, you just need to make sure that you pull down the Microsoft.azure.webjobs.extensions.cosmosdb package, which if you're a C# developer, that sentence probably made sense. If you're a JavaScript developer, a Java developer, you're kind of like, what did Jeff just say? Understandably so. So this would enable it so that if you're a JavaScript or Java developer, you just define and write your function.json or your Java attributes, and we will automatically pull in the extensions that your application needs. So this should be rolling out in the next month, which is great news for any other languages. We talked about the improvements coming in VS Code and VS for Mac. We've got another set of we talked about the improvements that we've already shipped for VS Code. We've got another wave of improvements that will be coming across Visual Studio and Visual Studio for Mac as well. Just some nice fit and finish items there. And a big one here, which I'm actually going to turn it over to Colby to in just a second to break down more, is run from zip tooling support. Should we jump straight to your thing now, or should we do? I think I've got one more bullet point.
Do your bullet, and then
All right.
I'll do a deep dive.
Okay, great. And then I talked about how we did the phase 1 set of improvements, kind of for the next few weeks and months even, as we get version 2 ready for general availability. We're going to continue to improve the performance. So there'll be some more work coming in the next weeks and months, tweaking, optimizing, and getting that ready to go. So Colby.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. Segue to you.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, I am Colby. I am a PM on the Azure Functions team, and today I'm going to talk to you about our Run from Zip improvements. Basically, for those of you who don't know, Run from Zip is a new feature, and it's kind of a runtime mode. It's not actually, it's a way to deploy your apps, but more than just that, it's actually a way of running your apps. So if you click on the next bullet, the key distinction of Azure, or the key distinction of Run from Zip is that instead of getting your files onto your site, blowing up a zip file and then actually just having those files on the site, you're actually running from the zip. So when you're actually doing a deployment, it's only one file that's being transferred. And what that means is that things are faster. And there are a lot of added benefits that come from this as well. I'll talk about first, there are 2 flavors of Run from Zip. You can either have the zip file that's being deployed live externally, so in a service like Azure Storage, for example, and then you link to that via an app setting. Alternatively, there's an internal option where you basically upload the zip file itself to the site. I will demo both of these in just a minute. Benefits of Run from Zip. Atomicity, number 1. If you are deploying a site, deploying a function app, there are certain scenarios where if a deployment is partially complete, people can touch the resultant application with the site being in a half-baked state. So because of Run from Zip, since it's a single file, all developments are atomic. You can't break it down any further, and there's a lot of goodness that comes around that. Predictability, because of this, if you are, say, I don't know, let's say you have a traffic manager and a function app in multiple different regions, and you want the same deployment to go to different places. Because it's just one file, you can very easily tell which version of your site you're running. And I guess that's the versioning bullet I have here as well. But one of the most important benefits is cold start. I think we had a demo a little while ago on the team internally of David, one of our dev managers, uploading a site that has the entire Azure Node SDK. And when he had uploaded that in the previous methods, because it had just giant NPM trees, the cold start for that app, the first time it was touched in over an hour, we it was something on the order of like 90 seconds to get up and running because it had to load so many different dependencies to the site. Now with Run from Zip, in the first flavor, the external zip, it was, I think, 10 seconds, and then the other one was like 8 seconds. So basically, massive improvements here. And even if you don't have a giant NPM tree, we're seeing a lot of really nice improvements to our cold start times because of Run from Zip. Limitations, it's in preview right now. As of now, it's Windows only. And one other thing is that the site, once you use Run from Zip, becomes read-only. So it's kind of like a final optimized state of your site, although you can obviously take off the zip and then do your own development mechanics. And because it's in preview, the initial release did not have any tooling support. But coming in the future, well, I don't have another slide for this, so we ended a presentation.
Oh, I thought the but was, but here's a demo of how you can use it now.
Yeah, I should have been, but no. The for the coming build, I'm not going to say 100% what we will have, just to
keep the suspense.
Keep the suspense, but let's just say the Visual Studio Code team moves fast, and there are some other things coming as well.
Great, Colby. All right, let's check out so you've got this set up. You've got both variants, I think you said. So I'll let you go ahead.
I am going to
show our wonderful faces again while we let Colby take over the screen with his thing too.
I'm going to share this application window. Great.
All right, we see it.
You see it. Beautiful.
We're all looking at it.
So what I have here, I have provisioned two applications, Run from Zip Demo 1 and Run from Zip Demo 2. I'm just going to walk through how I made these applications and show you that they're indeed up and running. So here I have Run from Zip Demo 1. In order to do this is the external site version. So what I did is I have my application. I was developing this locally, and then I zipped up my file myself, and then I inserted it into Azure Storage. So here I am opening up my Azure Storage account. I will go to my blobs. And right here in Blob, this is actually the same storage account that was provisioned automatically for me when I created my function. So it has this Azure Web Jobs hosts file or container. I also have the zips file, the zips container I've created. Under here, I've got my cold start v1 c#.zip. So this is just a test cold start app. So I have the zip file here. I'll zoom in on this just so you can see that it's here. Cold start v1 c#zip. Cool. Now let's get that ratio back to normal. And great, let's go back home, and I'm going to show it. So that's what I had here. Now, in order to get this into my function app, I have set an app setting. So I copied the URL. Storage has a concept of SAS URL, which is a way to access the storage resource. I go to application settings, and in my application settings down here, you can see I have this setting right here. Website use zip, and that is set to that blob right here that I set up. As you can see, it's the same directory structure. It's got zips and then cold start v1 c#.zip. So from here, once I have set this correctly, my application is now completely running from zip. As you can see, the functions have loaded. It is read only because we're moving from Run from Zip. And if I go and touch the application, which is live, it will have a cold start because I haven't touched this in a while, and boom, up and running. So this is a simple example. It was pretty quick. Now I'll move on to example number 2.
And just I know you called this out, but in there you had just like a direct link to your storage. You could do like a SAS URL if you wanted to secure it and make sure that not anybody can point to your zip file.
Yes, you can do a lot of fancier stuff than I was doing for this demo. And here, what I've done is I've actually uploaded the zip file onto the site. So we're going to go into, sorry, not app settings. I want platform features. I'm going to go into Kudu. For those of you who don't know, Kudu is kind of an advanced editor option for any app service site. So because Functions is built on top of app service, we have the ability to look into what's actually happening on our site. So if we open Kudu, open this debug console, we can see here are our files. So I go to data, go to site packages, and here I've uploaded my, let's go up one level again. we've got cold start v1 c#.zip. Load this up just a little bit. So what I want to highlight is that this is the same exact zip file. And then there's also a site version.txt. So if I open up this really quick, I can see that it's just pointing to the name of my zip. So what this means is that I have two different sites. I can edit this file and immediately switch between multiple zips, which makes the versioning story really easy. But anyway, this zip file is here on the site, as you can see via the Kudu console. I'm going to get out of this here and go back to my run from zip demo and open it up, and it should also be live. And boom, up and running as well. And that site was also cold, so that was the full cold start that you saw right there. Just a second, maybe two. Yeah, so that's it for my real quick demo, just to show you how to get up and running using run from zip right now. It is, again, going to become much easier in the future with our added tooling support that we will do coming shortly. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you can see our lovely faces again, and we will take some questions.
Great, yes. So hopefully this has been helpful. Thanks a bunch, Colby. So for early adopters, people anxious to try the latest and greatest, I definitely encourage kicking the tires on Run from Zip and giving us feedback as well. So with that, we'll answer some questions. I'm going to start, because oftentimes I start with the YouTube chat questions, and it means the people who ask questions ahead of time don't get the time. So this time we're going to reverse it. If you asked us questions on Twitter, we're going to start with you, and hopefully you're watching. So the first one, Colby, I will give it to you, but Tamaz wants to know, are there any plans to support custom triggers in Azure Functions?
Custom triggers. So what I would say for that is that in terms of actually integrated into Azure Functions making a custom trigger, we have no current plans, but you can do this today with logic apps and also Event Grid. So the path forward for us there would be build a custom trigger using either logic apps or Event Grid. We integrate already with those two services, and it's a really nice story there. I think Event Grid is great.
Yep. And
really easy solution.
I would definitely recommend Event Grid as a one. Part of the complexity here with triggers, whereas like we let people write their own custom binding extensions, is that for triggers, there's another element where our central controller needs to understand the trigger behavior so we know how to scale appropriately. But that also means that like our scale controller needs to be able to run potentially custom code, which makes it dicey. So it's not that we don't think it's a valid ask, but Event Grid is a totally viable option where you can get all the benefits without necessarily having to deal with the complexity. Okay, .NET Miami. I like seeing these usernames. I feel like we're like an official organization now. A few questions here. The first one, will there be support for using a Docker image as a unit of deployment in Functions? I'd like to publish my container registry or publish to my container registry and have Azure Functions pull from that. Colby, I'll throw. Do you know this one as well? This is a test. No.
This is this is an easy one. This is actually supported today in our Linux offering. So if you go to Azure Functions on Linux, which is currently supported in the dedicated plan, you can specify a container and get up and running from a container registry, just like that.
Yep. There's even a doc on docs.microsoft.com. I think it's run Azure Functions from a custom image that will walk you through getting it set up as well. Donna Miami had a few other questions. One of them was, this is a good one. How can we efficiently...
Wait, let me ask you the question.
Yeah, fair enough. Go for it. Go for it.
How can we effectively manage connections to databases and other networked resources as our functions scale up? Are there any patterns for implementing resilience patterns in functions? Jeff?
Very good question. This is one that I have been spending a lot of time on this month. Often how this surfaces is exactly a scenario I was just dealing with about a week or two ago, which was we have 30,000 items that are getting dropped into a queue. And for each of those items, we need to go do something in SQL. And if they just wrote a function code that says pull from queue and then stick in SQL, functions will scale out, and pretty soon they have so many parallel instances of functions that we might tip over the SQL server because functions scaled up more than the SQL was able to handle. So it's a very good question. There definitely are patterns that help with this today. The first thing that I would mention, which is a great pattern to know about, is there is something in Azure Functions, it's not very well known, called the host.json file. And if you search for docs on the host.json file, what it enables you to do is control exactly how many concurrent executions one instance of your function can have. So if I use the example of 30,000 items on a queue, If I expect that because of my, scale testing or whatever, that I'm going to have 20 or 30 instances that get spun up for functions, and I can see this through App Insights, I might want to control and say, you know what? I only want a single instance of function to pull in 5 messages at a time. And that way, all told, I'm only going to have 150 connections to SQL at the end of the day across all of my instances. Some triggers give you a little bit more control than others. Event Hub, you can actually be very specific in how many instances you want to have, because an Event Hub partition will directly map to how many instances you can scale up to. So if you only ever want 10 function instances, only give 10 partitions for Event Hub partition. Other triggers give you different granularities of control, and we're also looking into the future, some work that would enable you, regardless of trigger, to kind of set some more global limits as well. But there's a lot you can do even today. So like, we're going to do more to improve this, but there's a lot you can do today with that host.json file in terms of resilience patterns. And someone else asked a question about resilience and message checkpointing with event hubs. I actually just finished writing a series of blogs on my personal blog for right now, but it's on whatever, medium.com/Jeff Holland or something.
Jeff has a really great blog. I highly suggest.
Thank you, Colby. I didn't even ask him to say that. But it goes through kind of like, hey, how do I make sure I'm not losing messages, processing in order, and so forth. Last one from .NET Miami, and then we'll keep moving on. ASP.NET Core 2.1 is introducing an HTTP client factory. It would be great to add this to functions for managing HTTP client instances. Any thoughts on adding this? So this is good because first, and I have seen this more often than anything else, if somebody is seeing some weird exceptions or behavior from functions, it's likely because they're doing something like in every single execution, they instantiate a new HTTP client. Like they put using var client equals new HTTP client.
Anti-pattern.
It is an anti-pattern. It's a very common one. And the problem with this is a few, but one of the big ones is, as I mentioned, a single instance of a function can actually process a lot of stuff in parallel. And so if you're doing that, that means every single one of your parallel executions is having to spin up its own HTTP client, even if it's in the same instance, and it starts consuming a bunch of threads and sockets and connections. So the best way short-term to do this is say private static HTTP client equals new HTTP client. And then you're only initializing once at cold start or when your instance starts up, and then you're reusing it across all instances. That is the best practice. One way to make this more seamless is in 2.1, as was mentioned, there'll be an HTTP client factory. The short answer is right now, Functions v2 is only, or .NET 2.0. So we haven't yet had support for 2.1. So that would be the first thing that has to come first. Once 2.1 is there, I can't speak one way or another, but sure. This is an anti-pattern we see enough that I'm even talking about like maybe in some of our default templates for functions, then we start putting a private HTTP client in there so that people go down the path where they don't end up in a weird spot once they start sending 30 requests per second at their function and things start acting a little bit funny or funky. All right, this next one.
Funk.
Let's see, Colby. I don't know if you want to grab any of these ones. This one I can do them both. They're both fairly in the weeds. Do you want to ask this one then?
I would love to ask both of these.
Great.
Thank you, Jeff.
Go for it.
Letting me contribute.
You can actually ask them both because they're both very related.
All right. So from NH Willie, trying to replace HTTP ASP.NET API with Azure Functions using auth attributes and custom claims in JWT. Any docs/examples. And then from Josh Carlisle, related to the extensibility story, I'd like to hear if there's anything in the works to further the improvements to the filter framework. Okay, and these are both related, even though it might not seem necessarily. So there's a component in ASP.NET, which is like middleware, which is your HTTP request comes into your application, and at the end of the day, it has to execute your controller method or your function. But in the middle there, you can actually add your own custom stuff in ASP.NET. Some things you can add are like filters. You can add authentication behavior, which is like, hey, before you even execute this code, I want you to run it through this piece of code first to make sure that it has valid authentication or whatever it may be. And so the challenge with that right now is how Azure Functions works today. Is that we actually are in control of all of the middleware, and we only let you control the code itself.
Now, there is one exception to that, and that there is a feature that's documented in the Azure Functions, or I'm sorry, in the Azure Web Jobs SDK GitHub wiki. Sorry, I said that kind of fast, where we have a feature called function filters, where you can actually write your own custom little pieces of code that will be executed, for instance, whenever an exception occurs, or whenever, I can't remember all of the variations that it can do. So we kind of give you a little bit of middleware control there, but it is not a full-fledged middleware exposed the same way that you can do with ASP.NET. So the first thing is, I would say for both of these, check out how far you can get with function filters. For authentication specifically as well, there's also a feature called app service authentication that can do some authentication outside of your function for you. So that is one alternative, though you specifically mentioned custom JOT tokens, which it doesn't currently support. In the future, though, this is definitely a scenario we're looking into. And in fact, related to the assembly resolution feature, one of the things mentioned in the wiki that we're looking to do is allow Azure Functions to run out of process. And once that happens, I don't know all of the details. I am not the dev on this, but I do know one of the things that we're also interested in lining up is to give you more full control over the entire .NET pipeline. I can't give any dates on that, but I could say, check out filters today, check out app service authentication. It's a totally valid scenario. Some of the work items we're doing around assembly resolution, hopefully this will lead to a world where that also lights up as well. Okay, we've had a few more questions that have come in either through the chat or through this. Oh no, these were actually through GitHub, or I mean through Twitter. I can grab any of these, so you can just ask the question. You get either answer it or throw it to me.
Sounds good. This one's from Hans Olav. Is there any way to extend the Azure Functions on processing queues like you can with web jobs on the job host object, like setting name resolver property, or use your own message processor, etc.?
So web jobs gives you, I looked into this. I'm not an expert. I do know, similar to how there is job host and web jobs, Azure Functions has a thing called script host that does give you some configuration similar to job host. I would check out the documentation on that, see how far it gets you. Specifically with things like queues, though, there is always the fallback of just using the queue SDK directly. So check out script host, check out the docs on that, see if it gives what you need, and then I'll continue to dig into it more. Colby, next one. Keep them coming, man.
And again, I'm going to ask you. You can ask me the next one. How can I config my hosts.json correctly to have App Insights not log performance counter data? I'm flooded with megabytes of data I don't use for anything, and I don't want to pay for it either.
So I do know that the host.json file, this mysterious file that I talked about a minute ago, does have a setting specifically for App Insights and for telemetry verbosity. So you can control like sampling. You can also control like, do I want debug logs? Do I only want error logs? That would be the configuration that's there. If there's something, it sounds, I don't know if performance counters are included in that. I would think performance counters are fairly low because usually a performance counter is like we emit a single metric, even sometimes every like 5 minutes. So it's not, I wouldn't think it accounts for the megabytes of data. But if there is something that you need that we don't have, just open up an issue on our GitHub. For this one specifically, probably the Azure Functions host repository, and we can triage it and figure it out from there.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to answer this one?
Me, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was. Any plans to support Go?
Great question.
Thanks, Jeff. No worries, Colby.
So, without going into too many details, I think the answer here is that yes, we're exploring it. We do not have any concrete plans or dates we can say publicly at this time. It is a thing that we're looking into, and we are definitely committed to adding more languages. I think there are a couple other languages that we're exploring as well. Python, PowerShell, etc. A couple others that we want to light up in the near future. I think one thing I would note is that one of the entire points of doing our V2 runtime was this out-of-proc language worker work. So what that has enabled us to do is the language worker, what's actually running your code, is happening in a separate process than the Azure Functions host. And so that is different than what was happening in V1 of Azure Functions. So the fact that we're moving to V2 has enabled more languages in the future. And yes, it's something we're actively supporting. No, I do not have any concrete dates for you.
Or looking into, yeah, for sure.
But we're looking
Yep,
into it for sure.
For sure. Yeah, keep the, like, user voice is actually the best
Yeah.
place to track language support for V2 as well. So we definitely have a lot of votes for a few languages that we're investigating, figuring out how we can get workers. If there's other languages, I know Go is the one we hear often, cast your votes as well. So with that is all the questions we have here.
Cool.
The only other thing I would say too, as well, as I kind of like scan through the chat, we really do appreciate your feedback. Like, this is a growing product. We are always, the challenge that we're faced with is that Azure Functions is so exciting that everybody wants to use Azure Functions every single place that they can. And we want them to do that. And we're running as fast as we can to light up those scenarios. But given the huge breadth of scenarios we're dealing with, we've got, IoT scenarios, we have machine learning scenarios, we've got event streaming scenarios, backend API scenarios, serverless website scenarios. We really do lean heavily on the community to help us understand where we need to go next to light up the most value for the most number of people. In enough time, we should be able to support everything perfectly, but we have to do one thing at a time, or a few things at a time, because there's only so many Colbys to go around. So please keep actively engaged with us, tweet us, comment, whatever it can, and we'll keep doing everything we can on our side. With that, in terms of what's next, because we are running out of time, if you are watching now or watching the recording, please subscribe to this channel. We won't be having a webcast in May because there is the Build conference at the beginning of the month.
Come to Build.
So book your conference, check out the stuff on Build. But in the meantime, we actually have a number of clips that we've recorded and more that we will continue that are cool little bite-sized walkthroughs of common scenarios or patterns with Azure Functions. Those will be coming out a little bit over the next few weeks. So subscribe so you get alerts on those. Continue to check them out on the channel. Check out Build, stay engaged with us on Twitter, wherever else you can find our usernames or the Azure Functions brand. Let us know what we can do for you. And with that, Colby, any last thoughts?
Come to Build. Follow us
great.
on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. Follow Jeff on Twitter. Read Jeff's blog.
Sounds good. Okay,
Sounds
awesome.
good.
That's it for
Thanks,
today,
everyone.
Thanks so much for joining. Have a good one.